Okay, B'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we're about to start today's daf Kuf Yud Aleph on Chulin. We are on the top line. So the Gemara started off in the previous story with the Shaila about the liver. Rav Safra and Abaya were handling the heter or the isser of cooking a liver, how to properly cook and kasher a liver. So Kihoda Salak Ashkechel Reb Zrika, when Rav Safra went a second time to Eretz Yisrael, he again found Reb Zrika, instructed by Abaya, inquired of him as to the minig with respect to cooking a liver together with other meat in the same pot. Now, I just want to speak out that the Agra de Pirka, the Bnei Sascha writes in Agra de Pirka that the second time a person goes to Eretz Yisrael, he's kaina a lot more than the first time. It seems like the first time he's creating the kalim for it, and then the second time when he goes, he's able to, elevate that to greater heights. And he brings a ride from Avraham Avinu. So over here also, Yehoda Salak Ashkeche Reb Zrika. Reb Zrika said to him, "Hi Nami like to buy lach about this too. You should have no question." Danov Yanai Breder B'Amir Klon Lebei Yehuda Breder B'Shem Ben Pazi. For me and Yanai, the son of Reb Ami, visited the home of Reb Yehuda, the son of Reb Shimon Ben Pazi. Some write, I don't remember offhand who it's from, but so recently that Pazi was his mother's name and not his father's name. It could be comes from the Gainim. Could be there's different shittas about this also, remains to be explored at a different time. They served us a trachea with its attached meats, meaning the lung, the heart, and the liver, which all cooked together, and we ate it. The Teres Abayis, the Rashba, and the Ran have the lashon of krivu lekanya b'koifei v'achal. They served him a trachea with its attached meats, and he ate it. And when the trachea of an animal is removed, it comes out with the lungs hanging on it, and the liver and the heart's attached to the sides. Since the lungs, heart, and the liver were still attached to the trachea, they were obviously cooked together. So we see that the blood of the liver is mutter even after it emerges from the liver, and the liver may therefore be cooked together with other meat in the same pot. Ravashi and some say Rav Shmuel of Zerkunya objected to the raya. In fact, I'll say that the dam of the liver does become asur once it emerges from the liver, and therefore cooking the liver with other meat does make it asur. Maybe the mouth of the trachea was outside the pot when they cooked these meats together, and none of the liver's blood was escaped into the pot. The blood of the liver drains from its arteries through the tube of the liver into the trachea and outside the pot, and none of its blood was discharged into the pot, so it could be it's not a raya. Alternatively, maybe the liver was seared with vinegar or boiling water beforehand, so that nothing could come out of it. Will seal its pores and prevent the liver from discharging any blood when it's cooked with other meat, so it could be you don't have a raya from here at all. As was the minig of Rav Huna, that he would sear the liver for him in vinegar before cooking it. Rav Nachman chalti leberoischen, and Rav Nachman would sear the liver in boiling water. So Tosfos asks why the Gemara didn't bring a raya from the fact that the blood of the liver is asur after it comes out. What? I just gave them to you.
I have only one key for our room.
The minig of Rav Huna was that he would sear the liver in vinegar before cooking it, and the minig of Rav Nachman was that he would sear the liver in boiling water. So we started saying over Kasher and Tosfos. Tosfos asks, why does the Gemara not bring a raya for that the blood of the liver is asur after it comes out of the liver from the fact that Rav Huna and Rav Nachman found it necessary to sear the liver before they cooked it. Evidently, they held that if the liver blood would come out from the liver during cooking, it would make the other meat in the pot asur. Tosfos answers that perhaps they too had the same question that Abaya had, and they seared the liver prior to cooking it with other meat, only because they were chayshish that maybe the blood of the liver is asur once it comes out of the liver. And now it doesn't necessarily, meaning that they were bothered by the kasha. It wasn't something that was 100% vaday by them that they needed to do. The Sav Papa Kamed Rav Lamemar, and Rav Papa, while in the presence of Rava, thought to say, some say Sav Rav Papa, whatever the gersa might be, that chalo asir, that the vinegar in which the liver is seared becomes asir. Rav Papa was under the impression that some of the liver's blood seeps into the vinegar before the sealing process is completed. Amalei Rava says, Rav Papa, chalo asir, yonami asir. If you say that the vinegar is asir, then the liver too should be asur, for just as the liver discharges the blood into the vinegar, so too it will reabsorb the blood. Since the vinegar seals the liver's blood inside the liver, and the liver is not engaged in discharging, there's nothing to prevent it from reabsorbing the liver. So if it was indeed true that some of the liver blood seeps from the liver into the vinegar, then the liver would reabsorb the now asur vinegar and asur the meat. Hence, the fact that the liver itself is mutter indicates that none of its blood escapes into the vinegar, and consequently the vinegar itself is likewise mutter. Rav Bar Shava Iklul Be'Rav Nachman. Rav Bar Shava visited the house of Rav Nachman. Now, again, like we mentioned in yesterday's Daf from Kuf Yud, that when we're talking about the Menhage Achila of the Tanam and Amiram, we're going to be visiting a lot of the homes and seeing their hanhagas of how they dealt with food. So Rav Bar Shava Iklul Be'Rav Nachman. Rav Bar Shava visited the home of Rav Nachman. Aisule Kavda Shlika. They served him stewed liver v'le'achal. He didn't eat it. Meaning, because Rav Bar Shava observed that the liver hadn't been seared, and he was therefore afraid that it may have reabsorbed some of the blood that had discharged before the cooking. Amrulay, they told Rav Nachman, Bar Rav de Lagav Le'achel, the Talmid Chacham, who's your guest inside, is not eating what we served him. Umanu Rav Bar Shava, and who is he? Rav Bar Shava. Amru Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said to them, Gamu l'Shava, stuff it down Shava's throat. What was this? Meaning Rav Nachman disparagingly referred to Rav Bar Shava by his father's name. Rav Nachman seems very understandable, and Rav Bar Shava is indefensible, because Mishnah Truma said before that the liver itself doesn't become asur. Now the Gemara will explain where Rav Bar Shava was coming from. He wasn't doing this dam devel Torah, he was a svara for it. Although it was Rav Nachman's practice to sear the liver before cooking it, as the Gemara mentioned before, nevertheless, he followed that practice only when the liver was cooked with other meat, where there's a concern that the other meat would absorb the blood that was discharged by the liver. In this case, however, the liver had been cooked alone, so Rav Nachman didn't need to sear it. Although the pot in which the liver was cooked would have been forbidden because it absorbed the blood that came out of the liver, Rav Nachman was apparently not concerned about this because he kept a special pot for cooking liver and didn't cook any other food in it, which is the halacha that we're knowing today. When it comes to kashering liver with grates, people have liver grates. Now, I don't know too many people who have that, but we were zeicha to have liver grates, and, now it's liver grates, so you can't use it for other things. Well, Mitzvah Hashem, and Baruch Hashem, we got another grill since then, so we are now able to eat other things on it. Okay, Zakti Gemara weiter. Ketanoi, it seems to be the machlekes between Rav Nachman and Rav Bar Shava is the same as the following machlekes Tanoi. Rabbi Eliezer says, HaKaved oiseres ve'ein neseres v'pnei shapeletes ve'ein boilas. The liver makes other meat asur, but it itself does not become asur because it discharges blood, but it does not absorb any. And which is the identical with the Mishnah of Trumas that the Gemara mentioned earlier, that a cooked liver is definitely mutter, no questions at all. Rabbi Shmuel ben Eishal B'Yechem Rabbeika. Rabbi Shmuel ben Eishal B'Yechem Rabbeika says, Mitubeles oiseres v'neseres. A seasoned liver, meaning has spices on it, makes other meat asur, and it itself also becomes asur. Shluka oiseres v'neseres. Its stewed liver makes other meat asur, and it itself is asur as well. Rabbi Shmuel makes two qualifications of Rabbi Eliezer blanket statement regarding a cooked liver. First, he says that the halacha pertains only to an unseasoned liver, not to a spiced one. This is because the spices softens the liver and makes it susceptible to reabsorbing the blood that it discharged, even while it's engaged in discharging. And furthermore, Rabbi Shmuel takes issue with Rabbi Eliezer unqualified statement that a cooked liver does not become asur, which implies that it's mutter regardless of how long it was allowed to cook. To this he counters that only a liver cooked for the standard amount of time is mutter, for throughout this limited time period the liver is certainly engaged in discharging blood, so it does not absorb. So, in the Amachlekes that we had in the Gemara between Rav Bar Shava and Rav Nachman, so Rav Bar Shava, who didn't want to eat the liver, the liver that was shalok, was following the sheets of Rabbi Shmuel ben Eishal B'Yechem Rabbeika, while Rav Nachman, who held that even a liver that shalok is mutter, was following the shita of Reb Eliezer and the Mishnah Trumas. Now, it's the Rishonim speak out that obviously it's clear from the Ma'aseh that the Gemara is bringing that although there's a shita of Rabbi Shmuel ben Eshel B'Yechel Mampareka for Rav Bar Shvat to be semichan to be a machmir, it seems that Rav Nachman totally disregarded it. Had it been a serious tzad in halacha, then Rav Nachman wouldn't have totally disregarded it in that way. And this is also like what we had the Maisa previously about Abaya. Okay, and there's a lot more to this discussion. Mr. Shem will get back to it someday, God willing. Rabbi Bar Huna Iglil by Rabbi Bar Nachman. Rabbi Bar Huna visited the home of Rabbi Bar Nachman. Aisel Kamei Tlas Sove Tache. They brought before him 3 sa of smeared bread. These were special bread loaves that were made of fine flour and smeared with oil and honey. Amalahu miyavi yadisu da asina. Surprised by this lavish meal they presented before him, he said to them, "Did you know that I was coming?" Rabbi Bar Huna assumed that the large quantity of special loaves had been prepared l'chvayda, but he was surprised because his visit had not been expected. He just popped in. Amrulei, so they said to him, "Miadifas lanu mina? Are you important to us than Shabbos?" The loaves were prepared l'kavod Shabbos, as the pasuk says that you shall proclaim the Shabbos a delight. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya. In truth, we didn't know that you were coming. So what's pshat that we were serving such fancy bread? But it was l'kavod Shabbos. Adahachi, in the meanwhile, Ashkachu kavdatav besam painted the belia dama. Rabbi Bar Huna found this roasted liver that had in it an artery that was saturated with blood. Amalahu, he said to them, why did he do this? Why did he prepare the liver in such a way? L'chayra, although the blood absorbed in the liver, it's mutter, that's as long as it doesn't come out of the liver. However, the blood that passes through the arteries and is going to be aser. So you have to roast the liver in a manner which the blood is going to be taken out of the liver. They said to him, how then should we do it? Meaning if roasting it's not going to be good enough, so it is the proper way to clean it out. Amalu said to them, Kiru Shesi ve'erev, tear it lengthwise and widthwise, v'chitucha l'tachas, and position the cut downward during the roasting. When roasted in this manner, the blood contained in the veins and in the arteries of the liver drains out through the tear, and by the time the roasting is complete, the liver is indeed blood-free. V'hani mili kavda. And this requirement applies only to the liver. Aval tachla, but with respect to the spleen, shumna bi'alma, it's mere fat. So therefore, the spleen is red, which might give the impression that it's composed of hardened blood just like the liver. Were this the case, it would have the same chumras as the liver, meaning the blood couldn't be removed through salting, and if you roast it, it would require the proper kriya to get the blood out. The Gemara therefore informs us that this is not the case, rather the spleen, the tachla, is fat. And it may be roasted without being torn open beforehand, and it may even be salted or cooked in a pot, like regular meat, and you don't have to do any chumras to cook the spleen. Shumna bi'almahu kihad Shmuel, as was the minhag of Shmuel, avdile tafshila detachli b'yamid avid milsa, that he would prepare a cooked dish of spleen for him on a day that he would undergo the procedure of bloodletting. They would cook the spleen for him together with all the spices and ingredients usually accompany such a dish. And we learned that the spleen may be salted and cooked together with other foods in the same pot, just like any other meat, again with no chumras. Now, there's a whole Gemara and a whole sugya, really, very, very interesting sugya about bloodletting. The Gemara says on Shabbos, in a few places and elsewhere, that the minhag was by bloodletting that they wanted to do it as safe as possible. So they would eat certain things before and they would eat certain things after to try to keep it healthy and to keep it safe. And as we know from Kam V'Kama Kemis and Shas, Shmuel was a doctor, so Shmuel knew what he was doing and he was doing this. Now it's just interesting why the Gemara doesn't say what it is. Ki Avid Milsa, he did a thing. Why doesn't the Gemara specify what the thing was? That's also part of the Gemara over there because there's certain Ruchais Rois and Shadim that Haka Chainik over there. So you got to stay away from those things too. And if you're makbid about them, then they're makbid about you, as the Gemara Pesachim says. So then, and that may be part of the story. But again, this is something that needs a more in-depth exploration. And Mr. Shem, we will do in the appropriate time. Okay, Itmar, we learned. The Gemara discusses a shaila about a liver or an udder together with other meat on a spit, on a shish kebab. In the times of the Gemara, when ovens had their openings on top, the spit upon which the meat was roasted was suspended vertically into the oven. When roasting two pieces of meat simultaneously on one spit, one piece would be lying above the other, So then you wouldn't want the blood of one running into the others. It's my we learned. Kavda ilui bisra shari. To position a liver above a piece of regular meat on a spit is mutter, meaning just as it's permitted to roast two pieces of meat positioned one above the other on a spit, so it's permitted to roast the liver above an ordinary piece, and it's not an issue, because dama mishrak sharik, the blood which comes out of the liver onto the meat, slides off into the fire, and is not absorbed in the meat. Although the bottom meat is hot from roasting, it will not absorb the blood that's discharged from the liver, because the blood is slippery and will slide off the meat. However, to position an udder above a piece of meat on the spit is aser. My time, and what's the reason? Meaning, what's the difference between that and a liver? Chalav sruche misrach, because milk clings, and the milk discharged by the udder during roasting will not slide off the meat below it, rather it will cling to it and become absorbed. Rav Dimi Minarda Masni Ibcha, Rav Dimi Minarda learned Mamish Fakart, Kach Lili Bisra Shari, to position an udder above a piece of meat is going to be mutter. My time was to Pshat Chaliv Shchuta D'Rabbanan. Milk of a shechted animal is also with meat only Midrabbanan. Kavdi Li Bisra Aser. However, a liver above a piece of meat on the spit is going to be awesome, because Dam De Raisa, the Isra of meat, is more chomer than the Isra D'Rabbanan of Basa B'chalav. Meaning, it's true that the milk sticks and becomes absorbed into the meat, but since the entire Isra of milk of a shechted animal is Midrabbanan, the Chachamim did not apply their Isra in this case. And Rav Dimi disagrees with the Gemara statement before that the blood discharged by the liver slides off the lower meat. He says that this is true only of regular meat, since has very little blood. The liver is full of blood, so it's not going to slide off properly, and that blood is going to be aser min ha-Torah. Okay, so the Gemara weiter darish meremar. Meremar had gedarshan. Hilchas halacha is as follows: Ben kavda, ben kachla, tusi bisra shari, ilui bisra diavad in lechatchila loy. That with regard to the liver and the udder, if they're on a spit below the meat, it's going to be mutter. Ilui bisra diavad in lechatchila loy. If you put the liver or the udder above regular meat, so then diavad in, meaning you shouldn't do it, but lechatchila, initially a person shouldn't roast them in this way, meaning we taka should be machmer, like the Gemara tried to say before. Ravashi Rami bar Abba Chamua. Ravashi visited the house of Rami bar Abba, his father-in-law. Chazi lebred Rami bar Abba deko shofet kavda ilu bisra. And he saw that the son of Rami bar Abba, Rav Ashi's brother-in-law, was positioning the liver above a piece of meat on a spit. Kufir al-Famid base. Omar Rav Ashi said, "Kami yor haimei rabbanon, emar de Omar rabbanon devad lechatchila miyomer." I mean, Kami yor is lashon of gaiva. He says, how much of gaiva is this person? Granted that the Chacham have said that this is mutter after the fact, but did they say that this is mutter lechatchila? As the Gemara just said, that's what Meremar said. So who is this person that he thinks he could go ahead doing that? I mean, he didn't like the fact that he was doing this. Sagt die Gemara weiter. If there's a beidugi placed under the spit to collect the fat that drips from the meat during the roasting, there was a oil catcher. They would place a pan under the roasting meat to collect the fat which dripped from the meat during the roasting in order to later use the fat, which is called a beidugi. It's a receptacle for dripping. So bisra ilui kavda nami aser. Then even positioning the meat on top of the liver is aser, because the blood that's going to come out of the liver will be caught in the beidugi and it will be used, and the person who's going to eat the fat from the beidugi will also be eating the dam from the liver that went there. Why is that different from the blood of regular meat? How is one ever permitted to place a beidugi, meaning an oil catcher, under roasting meat to collect its fat? Since even regular meat that wasn't salted but it's been kasher through roasting discharges blood during the roasting, that blood will be caught in the beidugi together with the fat. Says Zakti Gemara, the blood of ordinary meat settles to the bottom of the keli, while the fat floats to the top. One therefore skims off the fat on top of the beidugi and leaves the red-looking blood behind, dama de kavda kafi, and the blood of the liver, however, floats to the top and mixes with the fat. Okay. Sagt die Gemara weiter. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, Sakim sheshachat ba, a knife which one shechted an animal with, also lachtich bariseach, when we not cut hot food with it. Now, I believe we had this Gemara earlier. Let's take a look. The Shita Mukabetzis and Mitzayin to Taisus Le'el Daf Chesed with base. Okay? Also lachtich bariseach, when we not cut hot food with it. When the knife cuts through the animal's neck, it causes the surrounding area to heat up, and the heat causes the knife to absorb the blood of the makam shechita. So even if after the shechita the knife is rinsed clean of any blood, one is forbidden to cut hot food with it because the heat will cause the knife to make the blood come out of it. So sakim sheshachat ba'asur lachlich b'reitzeach. It's saying if you cut cold food with the knife, amri le bay hadacha, amri la loy bay hadacha. Some say that the food needs to be rinsed with water, and some say that the food does not need to be rinsed. Although the knife was washed clean of any surface blood, the first shita holds that the pressure of the knife cutting into the cold meat causes the knife to make the blood absorb in the blade onto the surface of the food being cut. Since, however, the food is cold, so it's not going to go into the food. However, the food is, and it all remains on the surface. Therefore, it's enough to wash it out with water. The second shita in the Gemara, however, holds that the pressure of the knife cutting into the meat does not cause the knife to make anything come out, so there's no need to even rinse it before eating it. Rav Yehuda Mashmuel said, Ka'ar shamalach ba'basar, a plate in which meat was salted to extract its blood, asur lechel b'reiseach, it's asur to eat hot food in it because the salting process makes the meat hot, which in turn causes the plate to absorb the flavor of the blood discharged by the meat in the salting process. And placing hot food on the plate, even after you cleaned any blood off its surface, will cause the plate to give a blood flavor into the food and make it asur. Shmuel tamei, and Shmuel is l'shitaseit amar Shmuel maliach hareu kereiseach u'kavush hareu kemevushel. Shmuel says, where's this? This is a Gemara later on, and it's also Amsachim in a few places. So anything that's salted is like it's hot, and anything which is pickled is like it's cooked. Because salt causes a food to impart flavors into other foods, just like heat. Similarly, when you pickle in vinegar and spices, it also causes the food to give a flavor to the other food present in the pickle juice, just as if the two foods had been cooked together. Yes, Rabban Am Rabbi Yechanan, when Rabban came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Maliach einay kereiseach v'kavush einay kemavoshel. That which is salted is not like which is hot, and that which is pickled is not like which is cooked. Salting and pickling does not cause foods to give their flavor into other foods or kalim b'chlal. Abai said, Hadar Rav and Lesa. The statement of Rava is not factual. The he pincha avaber Rav Ami. There was an earthenware plate in the house of Rav Ami, the Malach Bebisra, in which meat had been salted with tavre. And Rav Ami broke the plate because he said that it was usher to use because it had absorbed the flavor of the blood and it cannot be kasher through hagala because it's a klicheres. You have to break it. The only way you can fix it is by breaking it, which is also true in regard to the tara process of klicheres kamavur throughout Seder Taras. Michti, now let us see. Rabbi Talmud Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi was a Talmud Rabbi Yechanan. So my time at Tavre, why did he break it? Is it not because he heard Rabbi Yechanan said that which is salted is like which is hot? So obviously, and therefore the plate absorbed the blood flavor and became usher, and there's no way out because it's a klicheres. So why did Rav Ami have to break the plate, wasting it? He could have retained it for salting meat in the future. So the Ran explains that the plate in the case of Rav Ami didn't have holes in it. So in order to use it for salting, it would have to have holes in it, and an earthenware plate that was not originally manufactured with holes you cannot put holes in it afterwards to expect it to work for salting it. Okay. Yosef, Rav Kana, Achuz, Rav Yehuda, Kamed Rav Huna. Rav Kana, the brother of Rav Yehuda, was sitting before Rav Huna. Yosef Kamar, Rav Kana was sitting and saying, Kar Shamalach Babasar, a plate in which meat was salted. Asur lechel b'reiseach, one may not eat it on it hot food. But a radish that was cut with a meat knife, mutar la'achle b'kutach, may be eaten with kutach. The sharpness of the radish would draw the fatty meat residue that's commonly found on the knife's blade into the radish, and now the radish contains actual meat flavor. Now, even if it's cold over here, because it's sharp, so it takes in the flavor. My time, what's the pshat that Rav Kahana differentiates between a plate and a radish? Just as the plate absorbed a blood flavor, so did the radish absorb a meat flavor, and the radish should be also with kutach. Now, kutach is something that has milk in it, so you wouldn't be able to eat it with meat. So Abaya says, Hayatera bala, the radish absorbed the permitted flavor. Vayisura bala, the plate absorbed a flavor that was asur. Meat by itself is something that's mutter, and only becomes asur when it's mixed together with milk. The radish absorbed something that was mutter. Blood, on the other hand, doesn't ever have a tzad to be mutter. Rava said to him, if it's absorbed in a permitted flavor, what happens? Safe hayatera. So if at the end of the day, when the radish is placed in the kutach, the flavor becomes asur d'isur ka'achal, and when he eats the mixture, he's eating something that's asur. What difference does it make that the meat flavor is presently permitted? Since the radish has absorbed meat, and the meat is asur with milk, the flavor will become asur when it's placed in the kutach. Elo Amar Rava, so Rava said, Hai efshel limitame, v'hai loy efshel limitame. The radish is capable of being sampled by a yid to see if it has the taste of meat, while the hot food placed on the plate is incapable of being sampled because the blood is asur for consumption regardless, and there's no possibility to test the plate being used for hot food, what it is. So you have to give it to Kfeila Arba, like the Gemara says previously. Rav Papa said to Rava, why do you say that there's no way to test the hot food placed in the plate for taste? Like we just said, why don't you have a guy taste it? Didn't we learn in a Brisa or in a Mishnah that such a thing is pattern? Which one? Cooked meat, one cannot cook milk in it. And if you did cook milk in it, the milk is asur. If the meat absorbed in the pot gives a taste to it, bishul but truma. Similarly, if one cooked truma in a pot chulin, one shouldn't cook chulin in it. Bishul b'naisin tam. And if you did cook chulin in it, the chulin is asur for non-kain if it gives a flavor of amrinan. And we said to you, Mamrinan loch. Some have the gersi here, it says Mamrinan loch. Bish lama truma, it's understandable in the case of truma, how you can ascertain whether the truma was imparted taste into the chulin tam like kayin. A kayin can sample the food, alabasa b'chalaman tam like, but in the case of meat that's cooked with milk, which is also to all yidden, who can sample it to determine whether the meat has milk in it. For amrit lana, we said to you, l'tamei kfeila. You can have a guy taste it. Achanami l'tamei kfeila. Here too, you can have a guy taste it. Meaning the hot food placed in a blood-absorbed plate to determine whether it has a flavor of blood or not. So why don't we rely on that? So achanami, it's indeed it's so that a guy may sample the food. Ki kamin l'tamei kfeila. We're talking about a place where you don't have a guy that's willing to taste it. Meaning the shayla b'chlal is, we mentioned this previously in Daf Tzadi Zayin. You could be saimich on a guy, but l'chayra, the Rishonim wonder what Rav Kahana was coming to teach us. It's not obvious that if there's no guy, then he can't taste it. So what's the chiddush over here? So Ayin Ritva and Ran. Okay, it seems like there's a big discussion over here also. Okay, here we're now on the first wide line, on the bottom of Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. The Gemara now turns the discussion to fish. Itmar, we learned Dagum Shal V'Kara, fish that was placed onto a hot meat plate. Rav Amar also kutach. Rav says it's also to eat together with kutach. Again, kutach, the Gemara Psachim says, was they would take old moldy bread and they would let it sit together with some milk and it would turn into some dip and it was very sharp and they would eat it. And it seems like it was a pretty standard way of eating bread. So it's milchiks and it's sharp, so it has two things that are working with it. So dagum shal bekara, fish that was placed into a hot meat plate. Rav Amar also lachol mekutach, it's forbidden to eat the fish with kutach. Shmuel Amar mutar lachol mekutach, and Shmuel says it's mutar to eat the fish with kutach. The Gemara says that where hot food is placed on cold food, or the other way around, tato govar, the lower food dominates. So where cold food is placed on a hot food, The lower hot food is stronger and makes the top food hot as well. Rav Amar also nice in tam. Rav says the reason why it's us to eat fish with kuta because of meat taste will be in the fish. Shmuel Amar mutter nice in tam bar nice in tam. But Shmuel says it's permitted to eat the fish with kuta because it's only an imparted taste from an imparted taste, meaning it's not enough of itself to be nice in tam, but it's a nice in tam bar nice in tam. So let's explain what this means a little bit. This is what's referred to in all the paiskim in all the places.